With its less hot fall season and mild winter, Central Texas offers an opportunity to grow an abundance of food in your backyard. But setting the stage for a thriving garden is rooted in timing and selecting the right varieties. As summer-like weather impedes the establishment of cool season plantings, Arctic cold fronts arrive just as some crops begin to mature. Recently, frigid temperatures have sparked many discussions about when to cover your plants and how cold weather may benefit seasonal pest issues. So how does a Central Texas winter gardener navigate these challenges? After 18 years of growing my own edible crops in Austin, Texas, I'm here to share my insights. I'm Scott from New Garden Road, always out here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. The weather of Central Texas can be very tricky, so ultimately, what choice do we have but to plant at the wrong time? Over the years of growing my own food in this backyard, I've come to the conclusion that average temperatures in our growing region don't really exist. It seems as though we can experience 3 or 4 different seasons, depending on where you're coming from, during any given week of the year. One of the pillars of growing your own food is knowing your first and last average frost dates. And here at Austin's Camp Mabry, the official recording site of the city, the first average frost is noted at December 2nd, and the last average frost is February 23rd. Now, of course, these are going to fluctuate, and each year they're not going to be that exact date. So you have to be prepared, you have to be nimble and flexible, and succession planting is always something that you should employ because you plant a little bit, maybe on the early side, right on time, and then a little bit late, and maybe even experiment beyond that, and hopefully you hit the sweet spot. Something that's important to note in that equation is that do you have the space in your garden to plant out that many crops and successively try to get those crops growing? But one thing that I often hear from folks in our gardening community is that they are waiting for the conditions to get to be just right. And I have to say that we just can't do that because of the way it is a roller coaster here. You're going to have to give it your best shot and cross your fingers, because I can tell you every single fall when I look at that planting guide and I say, okay, it's time to plant some radishes, some Asian greens. But once we get into September and October, if you're from Austin, you know what I'm talking about. You're about done. You're ready to hang out at Barton Springs full time. But it's important to understand why that is such a reasonable target for us, and it is because of the first average frost date in our area. But moreover, it's vital to understand when the crops that you're growing are going to be ready to harvest. So when you go to the nursery and you pick up a plant or a pack of seeds, the number that you need to look for is the average days to maturity or the days to harvest. I think it's also vital that we understand that when we look at this number, it's not typically regionally specific, and usually it points to average spring-like growing conditions. And also, as we grow through the winter, we can expect to add 10 to 14 more days to that number, because as the days are shorter and the sun is lower on the horizon, your plantings are going to grow more slowly. Now, for years I have used the Travis County Extension Service planting guide to tell me when to plant during the season, and I think it's really important to note here in the middle of January, which is where we are at the time of this recording, you have a lot of options that you could have also started in the fall growing months. Now, we already talked about how hot it can be that time of year, but that's when I typically target my plantings, and I get a little bit of a delayed start because it's often so hot. Sometimes things are growing more slowly, like I said, and they end up beginning to harvest about this time of year. I've got an abundance of leafy greens. I have about 20 heads of broccoli that are almost ready to harvest. But if you look at this planting guide, it will tell you that you can plant a lot of these same crops right now. But you have to look at the details of this planting guide. Like, it will tell you either to plant from seed or to plant from transplants, which are seedlings. And they've had a really good head start. In the case of broccoli, it is really important, along with your cabbage, crops that take a long time to mature. If you get a head start with a transplant, you're going to be in much better shape. So right now, if I'm planting some broccoli, I want the biggest broccoli plant that I can find. I don't want to plant from a packet of seeds. This is the burgundy broccoli, and if I look at the back of this seed package, it's going to tell me to plant outside 4 to 6 weeks before my last average frost. All right, but this is completely useless to me here, because if I do that, this broccoli is going to get fried before it gets a chance to thrive. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. You need to be aware of the options that you can plant and the difference between planting from seed or from transplant as it relates to the timing and when these plants will be harvesting for you, when that head of broccoli will be maturing, and you want the weather conditions to be ideal for its growth and development. Many times what I recommend to clients is that we choose the crops that will produce the fastest. For example, I've got a couple of different varieties of carrots that I want to show you. Yeah, see here I've got the purple dragon. This is a really amazing carrot. I love growing this one every year, but it takes on average 80 days, and that's in the spring. So what happens here in the winter, it's going to take you probably 4 months, and if you want a really big carrot, you can keep growing it and wait maybe 5 months, and by March you're going to start harvesting these if you planted them in, say, late September, October. On the flip side, I've got this Napoli here, which is 55 days to harvest. So if you want to get your carrots as quickly as possible, take a look at that average days to harvest. Maybe you want to grow some purple carrots. Do it. I would do it. I do. But also grow some of these. So then you'll get a staggered harvest, and you'll be hedging your bets in one respect too, because as we know, the weather is going to do what it does here in Central Texas, so we better take as many shots as we can. Two other examples of root crops to show you are these radishes here. So I love growing some daikons. Big daikons pulled from your soil are like trophies. Really fun to do, but 65 days. All right, so that's going to take a little bit. Here, the spring radish, these French breakfasts, super delicious, got a little spice to them. You're looking like 28 days. So in the middle of January, what you want to do is plant this one. You want to get in there, get across that finish line. As much as I want to plant some daikon radishes right now, and I'm going to plant at the wrong time no matter what. So you have to consider the amount of planting space that you have in your garden relative to your planting plan. Think ahead a little bit. What do you want to do in March? Because our options will change significantly at that point. You can go with tomatoes, start some beans, corn, squash, cucumbers. Are you going to have any room in your garden if you're sitting there waiting for your daikon radishes or your broccoli to finish growing? So leafy greens are another good example of things that you can choose to grow right now. Spinach, lettuce, Asian greens. They are a really fine selection, super nutritious, and we can't really grow these once late spring arrives, going into summer. You can grow some greens, but they're quite different. So I've got some lettuce and some Asian greens here to show you. This red sales is a super beautiful lettuce. The leaf lettuces are really easy to grow, and you're talking about 45 days to maturity. Can you harvest some baby leaves in 30 days? Absolutely. With these Asian greens, this Tokyo Bacana, this is a loose head cabbage, 44 days on average. So you want to get some cabbage, this is a really good option. Some of those other standard English cabbages, they're going to take you quite a bit longer. And if I was planting some of those right now, I would certainly be looking for some transplants. And you might not find those at the nursery this time of year. I hope that provides you with a little bit of insight on choosing varieties that you can grow in your garden through the winter, whether or not you're starting in October, November, or here in mid-January where I am. Just make sure you take a close look at the average days to harvest if you can find a reference to that, and understand that transplants offer you advantages because you're getting a big head start with them. Now, some of these fast producing crops, can you start seeds in trays and direct seed at the same time? That's called succession planting. That's what I like to do. And also, if I'm growing a head of lettuce, that lettuce matures, I harvest that lettuce. If I've started some other seedlings ahead of it, maybe 3 or 4 weeks prior, I can drop those in after I harvest that lettuce. So that's a good way to get a regular flow of vegetables coming through in your garden. But root crops are one that you always want to direct seed directly in your garden. So keep in mind how long it's going to take and what you intend to plant for the next season. Okay, this next section is going to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, so don't get offended. As we've gotten into some truly cold weather here in Austin, I've been noticing some of the online discussions, and I like to follow these community groups, these gardens, because there's a lot that I still have to learn. And one of the things that I've seen, the questions that has been proposed is, Is cold weather good for plants? Does it help with seasonal pest issues? To that, I can only say, are you kidding me? We're not living in Wisconsin. We don't have a prolonged period of cold temperatures that would actually cause these insects to die off. They're gonna just go down in your mulch, in some cracks. They're gonna fly off and go up underneath a rock, and about 2 weeks later, when it's 80 degrees, they're gonna come right back to it. So in my opinion, nothing is gained by leaving your garden exposed to these freezing temperatures. For me, this is an investment in my wellness, in nutrition. My food is of utmost importance, and I love nothing more than growing my food and bringing it into my kitchen to prepare a nourishing meal. So in that regard, I'm simply not willing to take any chances. Now, a lot of these crops that I'm growing this time of year are hardy to the upper 20s. But did you know that these crops, if they are exposed to temperatures 50 degrees or below for extended periods, which is not that cold, right? It's cool, but an extended period, like a week or so, like we had last week, then that can cause stunting or bolting in those crops. You know, one season I was growing some radishes, which are pretty easy to do. You know, they've got big seeds, they're easy to put in the ground, they're pretty fast to mature like those French breakfast radishes, but we were having below average temperatures for the months of January and February. Big surprise there. We are always breaking records around each corner here in this region, but what happened was I didn't get radishes. They bolted pretty quickly and went to seed. So could they benefit from being covered during a cool spell like that? I think so. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's important to gear up and be ready to protect our crops. They're an investment in our wellness. They're our food. Now, I will say that plants that have been established for several weeks or more are going to be more cold hardy through these events, and the seedlings that you just put out will be more susceptible to damage. Along with that, anything growing in a container will be more vulnerable as well. And to complicate things further, often what we get preceding one of these really deep cold snaps is compressional heating. When you see those temperatures ramp up into the 70s and 80s in the wintertime, you better keep your eyes on the weather, because you know what's coming next? Really cold air. And that's exactly what's about to happen this coming weekend. And this opens our plants up. Their vascular system, they're respiring, they've got the juices flowing, right? It's warm. They're photosynthesizing, they're doing their thing. And then when they get a 60-degree swing, that's going to be really tough on them. And just imagine if you're coming out of a really warm, cozy house and it's nice, and you get outside and it's cold, it's windy, you've got a 20-degree wind chill. That's a shock to your system. You're not going to be comfortable at all for 5 seconds. Now, does cold weather make plants sweeter? Does it make them taste sweeter? Yes, it does, because they have a way of insulating themselves with the sugars that they produce. They'll draw that up into the leaves, and they're better able to withstand some of these frosts that we'll get when it just kind of skirts that 32-degree mark. But the fact is, you don't have to have them fully exposed to freezing temperatures for them to do this. It's going to be cool around 50, 40 degrees. We get plenty of that. They are going to be darker in color, especially those with the anthocyanin-rich pigmentation, and they'll be a little bit sweeter as well. So leaving your plants exposed to the cold isn't really offering you an advantage in that regard. Covering plants during cold spells is essential in my opinion, and I've got a few tidbits that I want to share about my protocols when it comes time to do so. Number one, you want to make sure you're watering your plants deeply. You want that soil to be well saturated. I'm not saying it needs to be soggy and they are going to be, rotting and suffocating the roots, but you don't want it to be bone dry, because the water is what is responsible for capturing and holding on to the solar radiation that will accumulate in the soil, in the water throughout the day. And from there, you need to trap it. And you're going to do that with frost cloth, row cover. Some folks will use plastic sheets or blankets or whatever they have. I think the specially designed materials are best to go with. They've been durable in my opinion. A heavyweight row cover that protects to 10 degrees is all I really want to have here in this garden going forward. And the fact of the matter is, sometimes when it gets cold enough for long enough, you will need multiple layers of it. I'm talking about 2 or 3 layers, and then you're still going to be crossing your fingers. And you need some spring clips, some rocks, some boards, whatever you have to hold that row cover down. You want to take it all the way down to the ground. Again, you're trapping the ground heat. You want to make sure you've got the bases covered and sealed up the best you can, because as we get these strong cold fronts, we get some wind gust. If that opens up that cover, it's not going to be any good. It's going to let that air out overnight that you're hoping will keep your baby plants alive. So I've got some stories from the Winter Storm Uri event that happened in February of 2021. I had a really big garden planted out and things were looking great. I was having the best time. I was picking all kind of kale, had some good broccoli growing, and man, did things come through. It was really rough patch, and I did everything that I just told you. I watered, I covered really well, and I gotta say that we pulled through here pretty well. Roughly 80% of my vegetable crops survived. Now, I had some damage here and there, but all in all, you know, I didn't have that many losses, so I was really happy about that. Now, I think the story goes a bit further. I may talk in other videos about, you know, some of my reflections on that, but the systems work. And also, you know, I have a big collection of citrus trees. I didn't lose any citrus trees. So the bottom line here is to understand the resources that you have available to you, your local extension service planting guide. Look on those seed packs for information, understanding how long it's going to take for these crops to come to bear for you, and do your best to time things out. Plant when you can. If it's too hot, if it's too cold, you're either going to have to go for it or just wait for the next season. And here in my Central Texas garden, I know that the perfect season, it just doesn't really ever come. That being said, I grow a lot of delicious, nutritious, organic food, and I want you to do the same thing. Now check out more awesome gardening videos on my channel, like this video, and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own food. Keep it organic.